Hello, friends. I'm Regina Lux, and this is Veritas on the Rocks, Catholic edition. There's a sort of almost secret pain millions of people face. It's been occurring for as long as humanity has existed. Perhaps you've experienced this unique pain. This episode is about miscarriage. It may be triggering for some, but overall, it's meant to be affirming, so I don't feel the need to have a strong trigger warning. If you've suffered from a miscarriage, anything I say, you likely already know. You know what it's like to have that jolt of either excitement or confusion when you see that line. You know what it's like to let it sink in that your life is about to be forever changed. You know what it's like to make plans in your head for your and your new baby's future. You know the trepidation and the uncertainty and the hope. Then you know what it's like to feel that sting of physical pain. You know what it's like to suddenly realize what's going on. Maybe you know the depth of that denial, anger, bargaining, despair. You know what it's like to have the rug pulled out from under you. You know what it's like to be given a new adventure just for it to be canceled. You know what it's like to be the parent of a child whose eyes you will never know the color. Then you move on, but not really. You never really move on. You only learn to cope. How is someone supposed to get over a loss so great? You don't. Yet you almost feel expected to. You might not tell anyone at all and suffer in the quiet, telling yourself that it's not as bad as you might feel. You might name your baby and remember their due date every year when it comes around. You might tell yourself that you're crazy for feeling the depth of despair that you feel. You might tell yourself that this happens to too many people for it to matter so greatly. You tell yourself that others are going through so much themselves, and you ought not bother them with your pain. You might even fear becoming synonymous with grief, and afraid people might avoid you. You struggle to figure out how you ought to feel, who you ought to tell, and whether or not your suffering is worthy. It is. Your suffering is valid. The pain you feel is normal. You have lost a child, and it's okay to feel the weight of that. Parents who suffer in this way ought to be affirmed, and their suffering ought to be normalized. I was recently inspired by several strong Catholic women in my life who have suffered from miscarriages. A couple of weeks ago, I had a bit of a plot twist when, with about a day's notice, I jumped into my car to drive 5 hours to a friend's side to bury her preborn child who unexpectedly died at 9 weeks. Did you know that was a possibility? To have a burial and grave for your preborn? It is, but most people don't seem to know about it, not even Catholics. But you can have a burial, and most people don't seem to take advantage of that. Why not? There are two things that I want to address in this video: the affirming and the normalizing of the pain of miscarriage. I'm combining these two concepts into one video here since, as Catholics, I expect a certain level of understanding, a sort of springboard, and certain things don't really need to be as spelled out. But I'm making 2 other videos addressing this with my secular brand, dividing the topics and breaking it down a little bit more for a non-Catholic audience. Now, Catholics believe life is sacred from the womb to the tomb. We believe that God wills those who are conceived to exist, whether on earth or in heaven. God desires those conceived to ultimately be with him in heaven, and we believe those who are lost while preborn become our own saints. No, God does not create people simply to be separated from him, nor does he punish the innocent. Do not tell a parent who lost a preborn child that their child is not in heaven, because you're wrong. There's a bit of an issue within society when it comes to affirming the pain suffered after a miscarriage. When my friend lost her child at 9 weeks, whom she named Willow Rose, people truly rallied for her. She's part of a few strong Catholic communities where she's a pillar, so she had a lot of support, including from several people who also experienced the same pain. We sent her gifts, books, and she had a meal train arranged for her. Now, this woman doesn't exactly have the type of personality to become emotional about things easily, and the wave of pain hit her so hard that she kept telling us, "I feel crazy that this is hitting me so hard." We would affirm her by reminding her that it cuts her deeply because she has living children and therefore knows what she's missing out on, and that, being a Catholic convert, she has a deep awareness of God and how precious each life is. She truly believed it was God's will for this child to exist, and I truly believe it was too, because now Willow Rose has inspired many with her short existence, and even now, several more people will learn of her, as her life is what spurned this episode, and perhaps her short life will help validate so many more women's pain. But even without that particular comfort to her mother, she was still a valuable member of our world, as all children are, remembered and celebrated or not. And yet, even with a full Catholic awareness, my friend still felt like she was crazy that this loss affected her so deeply. Are you a woman who has felt that way about your own loss? Why do you think that is? The Veritas of the matter is that miscarriage is an awful pain millions of parents face, mostly in silence. That suffering is endured mostly in secret because they become ashamed of that pain. Why in the world ought they be, though? The fact is that we live in a society that actively seeks to push back on the pain of miscarriage because children are treated as valuable or not based on how wanted they are. We can sit back and see how torn apart our world is by the devaluing of human life, and it's why we fight so hard to uphold the dignity of life from the womb to the tomb. But the reality is that a society that celebrates abortion will never affirm a parent's pain after a miscarriage. It just logically cannot validate it. Our culture of death teaches us that a life only matters when the evolutionary fitter wishes it to. Survival of the fittest, after all. A society cannot tell a woman it's okay to have an abortion at any time and tell another woman her sobs of despair when she loses her 9-week-old preborn are valid. So we live in a world where even as Catholics with a full awareness of the value of life, it's still difficult to open up about the pain of miscarriage because we've been subconsciously trained by the culture of death that children in the womb don't matter. And unfortunately, too many Catholics are okay with perpetuating this mindset, which in turn harms parents who suffer from miscarriages. Just another way abortion hurts the world. Parents feel as if they cannot publicly mourn the loss of a preborn child for this reason, but also because they didn't have much to bury. It's almost as if a child miscarried is of less value because there's simply less of them. The world's focus on the value of material things, the bigger the better, is well represented here. It's as if you don't have something to hold, the significance is missing. And yet we see how Jesus Christ, God himself, will contain himself in a tiny host. A child's entire soul still existed in that small body. There's also the matter of the pain of miscarriage being unjustifiable because it's not rare. So many women miscarry. Does that mean that they ought to feel it less because it happens to so many? Everyone's parents eventually die too. That's something that happens to even more people. Does that mean that the pain of losing a parent isn't justifiable? Lots of people die of cancer. Does that mean mourning the loss of a life lost to cancer isn't justifiable since it's not rare and happens to a lot of people every day? So then why is miscarriage the pain that must be ignored? To write this script, I spoke with some parents who experienced the loss of preborn children, and a couple of themes which seemed to repeat was that they felt unjustified, feeling as much pain as they did. But what's more, they did not wish to burden others with this pain due to how unjustified they felt. I just spoke a little bit about why they might feel unjustified, but let's address the perceived weight they thought they would burden others with. Everyone is fighting a battle, every single person, And if we feel unjustified in feeling a pain, then we feel even worse asking for help to bear it. However, as Catholics, we might be forgetting that affirming this loss is also affirming the sacredness of life. When we affirm that the loss of a preborn is a justifiable pain, we affirm God and His creation. So it is not a selfish thing to disclose the pain you feel and seek help to bear it. My parents suffered 2 miscarriages before I was born. They don't hide it, but they aren't very open about it either. When I asked them why they didn't talk to us about it as children, they, like virtually everyone I spoke with about this topic, expressed that they didn't want to weigh us down with their pain. They wanted to focus on their living children and didn't want us to become upset at the loss of our brothers. However, I would argue that my realizing that I had 2 saint brothers in heaven would have greatly affected me in a positive way. I understand my parents wishing to spare their living children from potential pain, but I was also a very spiritual child, and I know I would have often prayed to my older brothers or felt extra protection because I knew I had them. As with the concept of memento mori, I don't think people ought to hide from children the reality of death because it magnifies the greatness of heaven. This seems to be a bit of a change of attitude in my generation in contrast to our parents. Many Catholic families I know who suffer from miscarriage do not hide it from their children. They use their lost sibling as a way to outline the hope of heaven and deepen their children's understanding of the sacredness of life, which will be what battles the culture of death. Fighting the subconscious and sometimes loud message that life in the womb doesn't matter will be what alters mindsets and pushes our society towards a culture of life. I submit to you that children would not be near as disturbed as some might believe if they are simply raised to believe in God, heaven, and the sacredness of life from the womb to the tomb. Of course, every child is different, and parents ought to gauge their own child's emotional health. But I do not think parents hiding their pain from their children is as beneficial as some might argue. It also solidifies how important their parent feels about each individual child's life and will help make that child feel more worthy of love and affirmed in their own existence. To see how much their parents would have mourned their death if they too had been lost can be extremely affirming to a child. It also reaffirms how much they ought to love their living siblings and treat them well. People who suffer from a miscarriage experience a wide array of feelings. Another theme I oftentimes hear from women is that they feel like failures. Their womanly body didn't do as it was supposed to and couldn't keep their child alive. Now, of course, from a logical point of view, we know that this simply isn't justifiable for a woman to feel like a failure. Do not tell a woman that she is a failure as a woman because of a miscarriage. That is extremely uncharitable and in most cases wrong. It's wrong to minimize someone else to their mere ability to breed. That's not what Catholics ought to do. We seek to expose to the world the value of human dignity and the human soul. Parents of lost preborns oftentimes feel a sense of unworthiness. Unworthiness to feel their own pain, unworthiness to share it, unworthiness in their own body. And none of that springs from goodness or truth. People are not measured by what they can create or their potential, and that is the Veritas for the preborn, as well as for adults. A quote from one mother of miscarriage, which I thought cut deeply, is, "It's like living in a realm of existence that we participate in, but don't participate in." The pain of miscarriage can seem unmanageable. We are blessed to be Catholic and have many good witnesses to console us. So how do you start to manage that pain? Firstly, acknowledge it. You aren't crazy for feeling the depth of despair that you feel. That is truly the natural response, which our secular culture seeks to undermine. As Catholics, we're already used to standing against this culture. Openly acknowledging the suffering miscarriage brings only creates a more sturdy foundation to stand on, looking the culture of death in the face and defying it. Part of acknowledging the pain that you feel is getting the help you need to heal, whether that's through counseling or simply drawing closer to God. Don't deny it. Don't shove it down so you try not to feel it. Don't tell yourself it's unwarranted. The pain of losing a child never goes away. In fact, it might even be renewed when you have grandchildren, because you have a renewed awareness of what grandchildren you might be missing out on. God is the divine surgeon, and he wants to help us heal. Sometimes reopening an infected wound so it can heal properly is what is necessary. Don't tell yourself that it's no big deal. Don't tell yourself you are unworthy because of miscarriage. Do you think that is what God wants? We are so blessed to have Mary. Mary knows what it's like to lose a child. She stands ready to be our consolation. She knows that pain. If you've suffered from a miscarriage, do not be afraid to voice your pain. Do not be afraid to tell others of the saint you created for heaven. Your pain is valid, and you deserve healing. There's much more I could say about this, but I think it better that I end this with words more beautiful than I could ever muster from a far wiser lady. After her sister-in-law experienced a miscarriage, St. Cecilia reached out to her through a letter. She said, "When I had to close the eyes of my dear children and bury them, I felt deep sorrow, but I was always resigned to it. I did not regret the pains and the sorrows which I had endured for them. Many persons said to me, 'It would have been better for you if you had never had them.' I could not bear that kind of talk. I do not think that the sorrows and the troubles endured could possibly be compared with the eternal happiness of my children with God. Besides, they are not lost to me forever. Life is short and filled with crosses, and we shall find them again in heaven."